First, the good news. Some desperately needed repairs to the state's transit system are either completed or on pace to finish ahead of schedule. But there's also some bad news coming down the tracks, specifically regarding where the T is going to get the money it needs to keep running in the years to come. Here to break down what it all could mean for your commute is GBH News transportation reporter Bob Seay. Bob, good to see you, as always. You actually have a little bit of breaking news before we get to the glass half full, glass half empty stuff that I mentioned. What is this breaking news that you've brought into the studio with you?
Well, our colleagues at WNYC in New York have published a story that Richard Davey, who used to be the general manager of the MBTA years ago and for the past 2 years has headed up the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York, has made a decision to come to Boston and head MassPort. We can't get any confirmation of that from MassPort at all. They say they're still interviewing finalists. They haven't made a decision. But apparently a transit workers union president in New York has confirmed that he says that it's up to Davey to simply accept the job.
So it sounds like it's reached a point where even though it's not officially confirmed, we can take it on good authority that it's happening. Just really quickly, what's Davey's rep in the world of transit?
I think it's very good. I mean, he did a fairly good job at the MBTA, and then when he took over in New York, he had to take over after COVID, and he really built up the ridership to almost pre-COVID levels.
Yeah, I remember seeing those numbers.
Yeah.
They were getting
but he has been beset with a lot of problems. Congestion pricing is a big issue in New York. There's also been violence. Remember, the National Guard was called out. So there are a lot of big challenges in New York City. But he there has been credited with doing a good job.
All right, on to the good news. We'll emphasize the positive to start out. There's good news involving the subways here in the Boston area. What is it?
Well, as we know, we're involved in a year-long effort to eliminate all the slow zones on all the subway lines. There were more than 200 when we began. And just recently, work on the Red Line has eliminated another 13 very critical speed restrictions in the downtown core area between Park Street and JFK UMass. And I've heard from some riders and seen on Twitter, people are like, wow, the subways are actually moving like subways should. And it's been such a long time, and people have had to deal with these slow zones for such a long time. It's evidence that Phil Eng, the general manager's plan of fixing these slow zones, is working. And he really needs some small successes here to build up his credibility as he moves through the year.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anything that he can point to that's been achieved gives people more patience, more confidence that he'll be able to get more stuff done. And the Blue Line, did you tell me when we were talking earlier, all the slow zones are gone?
Yes, last month. That was all, they were all eliminated. And so his plan appears to be working. And the only complaint I've heard is about the shuttle buses. Which they have to employ to, and apparently during the Red Line diversion, as they call it, the shuttle buses were problematic.
Yeah, no one, you're never going to win with the shuttle bus. Right? It's like the transit equivalent of a substitute teacher. Everyone gives it a hard time. No one likes it.
People were willing to endure it as long as they could see some.
No offense to substitute teachers out there who may be watching. All right, the Sumner Tunnel. Good news there as well after that very disruptive shutdown last summer. Why are people maybe going to be pleased with how things go this time around?
Well, instead of another 2-month-long shutdown for July and August, they've limited it now to just July. And they're able to do that by doing a lot of extra work on the weekend closures that we had this past year. So much so that they really feel confident that they can remain closed for just 1 month. And, of course, August, it gets much busier with college students returning and everything. So it's sort of critical for them to get it done by then. So people using the Sumner will have to endure just 1 month instead of 2 this year.
That's great.
Yeah.
What needs to be done in the Sumner? What's on tap for that month?
Well, last year it was the ceiling and the arches. This year it's the roadway itself that's being rebuilt. Okay.
And once that month of work is completed, there's still going to be more work left to be done, but it's going to be done on evenings and weekends, right?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Which, again, significantly less disruptive than just the complete shutdown. All right. I want to talk to you about what's going on with the state's Transportation Funding Task Force, chaired by Monica Tibbits-Nutt, the Secretary of Transportation, who got in hot water fairly recently for some comments she made speaking to an advocacy group. We can take a look at some of what she had to say and then double back.
I'm going to talk about tolling. I'm going to talk about charging T&Cs more. I'm going to talk about potentially charging more for package deliveries, charging more for payroll tax, basically going after everybody who has money. And when I'm talking tolling, I'm talking at the borders.
So after that, Governor Healey distanced herself from those comments. There was a big maelstrom in conservative media in particular. Now the mandate of the task force that she heads is supposed to come up with funding solutions for transit in the state. The mandate has been significantly weakened, right?
Yeah, I think it has. And people I've talked to say it's a bit of a retreat, because this task force was to come up with some definite recommendations by the end of this year. And the funding of the transportation system is perhaps the most important, critical issue that the legislature and all of us face, is how we're going to keep this transportation system going. And tolling, or if you want to call it that, or road pricing, would have been one of the major components of solving that problem, whether people like to hear it or not. It's considered to be one of the fairer ways of doing it. And so what we heard after Secretary Tibbits-Nutt's comment was, it's been taken off the table by Governor Healey. Well, that's quite a blow for a lot of people who really were looking to at least examine it. And I think it still will be examined in some form.
And tolling's been taken off the table by the governor, who's distanced herself again very quickly from Monica Tibbits-Nutt's comments. But also, this task force is no longer presenting suggestions that have the weight of the governor behind them, right? They're presenting, what did you say the term is, a roadmap or a toolkit?
A toolkit. They're going to come up with several options that somebody else can make a decision about.
If they, yeah.
And so it's a really can being kicked down the road big time, I think, and it sets us back, I think, several months. We don't have a lot of time to solve this funding problem.
Just to drive home the funding problem that you're talking about, just to emphasize the magnitude of it, we've got a graph here, which I'm hoping we can pull up. The big numbers are at the bottom. It identifies, total revenue projected to come into the T in the coming years, total expenses. The revenue is the moderately light bar. The revenue is the expenses are the dark bar. And you can see there, if you peek down at the bottom, that when we look ahead to fiscal year 2029, we're looking at $863 million worth of a deficit.
Yes. Yeah,
it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. And we're going to start hitting it in fiscal 26, which begins next July 1st, when really the MBTA has sort of emptied out all the spare change it has to meet that next year's budget deficit. They can do that. But after that, they're on their own, and we're on our own in terms of coming up with some kind of solution. And there has to be a solution. So it's going to be very difficult for this task force, and I think for politicians in general to see this through.
Huge problem. It will be fascinating to see how they try to solve it.
Lots of politics.
Bob Seay, really good to talk to you about this. As always, thanks.
Thanks, Adam.